a crying baby, a broken father, and a homeless young woman with nowhere left to go. Everyone expected the rancher to slam the door in her face. Instead, she whispered 7 unforgettable words. "Let me stay, I'll raise your son." What happened after that promise transformed 2 lonely lives forever. Stay until the very end because this Wild West story proves that sometimes God sends a stranger when a family needs a miracle. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable Wild West stories filled with hope, faith, and second chances. The last rays of the setting sun stretched across the Wyoming frontier, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Outside a weathered log cabin stood Ethan Walker, a hard-working rancher whose broad shoulders had carried every burden life had thrown at him, except the tiny crying infant in his arms. His son, little Noah, had been crying for nearly an hour. Ethan bounced him gently, whispered comforting words, and even walked circles across the porch, but nothing worked. Since his wife, Sarah, had died during childbirth only 3 months earlier, every day had become a battle between grief and responsibility. He could repair fences before sunrise, break wild horses by noon, and haul timber until dark, but soothing his hungry, frightened baby always left him feeling helpless. The silence inside the cabin reminded him of everything he had lost. The home that once echoed with laughter now held only the sound of a baby's tears and a lonely man's heart slowly breaking. As Ethan stood staring toward the distant hills, he noticed someone walking slowly up the dusty trail leading to the ranch. It was a young woman dressed in a faded frontier dress with a worn red headscarf tied around her dark hair. Dust covered her boots, and exhaustion showed in every step she took. She carried no trunk, no horse, and no possessions beyond a tiny cloth bundle hanging from one shoulder. Hunger had left her cheeks thin, yet there was quiet determination in her eyes. When she reached the gate, she stopped several feet away, not wanting to frighten him. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said softly. "I haven't eaten since yesterday." Ethan tightened his grip on Noah. "I don't have much to spare," he answered honestly. She nodded. "I understand." She turned as though ready to leave, but before taking another step, she glanced back at the crying child. Her face changed completely. "You've been alone with him, haven't you?" Ethan looked surprised. "How could you know?" "The way you're holding him," she replied gently. "You're trying your best, but you're exhausted." For a long moment neither spoke, then she quietly stepped closer. "I'm not asking for charity." Her voice trembled. "I'm asking for work." Ethan remained silent. She looked directly into his tired eyes and spoke the words that neither of them would ever forget. "Let me stay, I'll raise your son." The wind seemed to stop. "I can cook, I can clean, I can mend clothes, I can milk cows, I can work beside you from sunrise until dark." She swallowed hard before adding, "I don't need wages right now. Just give me a roof and let me care for him." Noah suddenly reached tiny fingers toward her. The young woman hesitated before gently taking the baby into her arms. Almost instantly the crying stopped. For the first time in days, little Noah rested peacefully against someone's shoulder. Ethan stared in disbelief. "What is your name?" he finally asked. "Grace." The answer seemed strangely fitting. For the first time since burying his wife, Hope quietly stepped onto his porch. Grace stayed, but only after Ethan made one condition. "You'll never be treated like a servant," he said. "If you work here, you'll eat at my table." Grace smiled gratefully. "That's more kindness than I've known in years." The next morning, before sunrise, she was already awake. She lit the stove, baked fresh biscuits, cooked warm porridge, and gently rocked little Noah while Ethan headed out to feed the horses. When he returned, the cabin no longer felt cold and empty. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, the floor had been swept, and Noah was sleeping peacefully in a handmade cradle Grace had repaired from old wood stored behind the barn. Day after day Grace worked without complaint. She washed clothes in the creek, tended the small garden Sarah had once planted, mended Ethan's worn shirts, and sang soft lullabies whenever Noah cried. The little boy soon laughed whenever he saw her. Even the ranch seemed to come alive again. Flowers bloomed around the porch, the barn was spotless, and warm meals waited on the table every evening. One afternoon, Ethan quietly admitted, "I don't remember the last time Noah smiled this much." Grace looked at the little boy playing on a blanket in the yard. "He doesn't need expensive toys," she said softly. "He only needs to know someone is always there." Those words touched Ethan deeply. Soon, neighbors began talking. "That stranger is living at Ethan's ranch. People will think she's after his land. You can't trust someone who appears out of nowhere." The gossip spread quickly through the valley. One afternoon, a neighbor rode to the ranch and warned Ethan, "You ought to send her away before folks start talking even more." Ethan calmly looked toward Grace, who was teaching Noah to clap his tiny hands while laughing beside the porch. Then he answered without hesitation, "They're free to talk, I'm free to be grateful. If caring for my son makes her family, then this ranch is exactly where she belongs." The neighbor had no reply. That evening, Grace accidentally overheard the conversation. Tears filled her eyes, not because of the gossip, but because no one had defended her before. For the first time since losing everything, she realized she was no longer simply surviving, she was finally home. But neither Ethan nor Grace knew that someone connected to Grace's painful past had just arrived in town, and the secret they carried threatened to destroy the peaceful life they had begun building together. A few days later, a wealthy ranch owner arrived claiming Grace had stolen money before disappearing. The townspeople quickly believed him and demanded she leave. Grace quietly stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "I never stole a single dollar," she said. "I left because his foreman tried to force me into marriage. When I refused, they spread lies about me." Before anyone could answer, an elderly housekeeper from that ranch rode into town. She carried an old ledger and a letter proving Grace's innocence. The foreman had confessed before dying, admitting he had framed her out of revenge. The crowd fell silent, ashamed. The same people who had doubted Grace apologized one by one. Ethan walked to her side, took her hand, and spoke firmly. "She came here with nothing but an honest heart. She saved my son, brought peace back into this home, and reminded me how to live again. No one will ever drive her away." Little Noah reached up and wrapped his tiny arms around Grace's neck, calling out the first clear word he had ever spoken, "Mama." Grace burst into tears. Months later, Ethan and Grace were married beneath the old oak tree beside the ranch. Noah laughed as wildflowers covered the valley, and the lonely cabin became the happiest home for miles around. Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't finding someone to rescue you, it's finding someone willing to become family when they had every reason to walk away. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes kindness can change a life forever. See you in the next unforgettable Wild West story.